Today we're talking about some of the best super and allelic combos that exist in ball python breeding. There are a lot of incredible examples that we could pick from, and this list won't even scratch the surface of it, but it's some of the top ones that we really wanted to talk about today. The way that supers and allelics work are very similar to how a recessive would work. Two copies of the gene create something different from just the one copy of the gene. Recessives typically have no look to them at all. They look exactly like a normal, unless they don't, which if we haven't released that video yet, you'll want to check out our next one. If we have released it, go check it out. Regardless of that, supers are always going to pass on one copy of their gene, and it's the same thing with allelics. The only difference is that allelics are two copies of different genes that have merged together that will now always pass on one copy of either of the genes. Starting off with super GHIs. GHIs are what you'd call a dark morph. They create a lot of granulation and shadowing. So when you get the super version, you might think that completely different, right? But no, it just amplifies what GHI already does. It makes it even darker, makes it a little less shadowy, and more or less just brings in these just really dark examples. However, you do get a lot of the granulation still inside the pattern, and they are usually very, very visual, incredible looking animals. Some of the absolutely incredible things you can do with GHI include clown, making a super GHI clown. This one also has Mojave in there too, which GHI Mojave is a very popular combo, but even just the super GHI clowns are just absolutely incredible looking. You can see some examples of what just a super GHI clown looks like here. They're absolutely incredible. Really leans into that dark type morph, but doesn't overdo it. And if you look at the head, they're actually kind of light. So there's a lot of cool contrast here. The pattern is just off the wall wonky, kind of like some spooky version of a ball python. I've seen a lot of combos with GHI and Freeway, and they're incredible too. They just erupt the pattern into these crazy almost letters on the side of them, really thins them out, and the shadowing really ends up coming back quite a bit too. Leopard obviously helps in this particular combo. Just a really cool, expressive animal that has a lot of contrast to it in that it's dark, ends up showing some light near the belly, and a lot of shadowing. On top of that, just a wonky pattern. You know, it looks like I see a C and an H there, and on top of that, just some other things that just don't follow any sorts of rules or mechanics whatsoever, and are just wavy lines or circles. And then some of the peak things that you can get is something like this, just where the shadowing really shows itself off, and that's really where GHI shines and what it does in this almost translucent type background pattern. And I just mentioned it's a dark morph, but look at how well it works with light. Just because people say they like the dark morphs doesn't mean that they just want a black snake. A lot of times it's about what that contrast can do with your animal, and then how they merge together and create something so cool like this one being a super GHI red stripe yellowbelly spot nose clown. So GHI is another really good one that supers just end up working well with quite a few things, especially when you look at its initial example and see how dark it is. It doesn't appear that it would be able to have this sort of potential in terms of working together with some light morphs, but it clearly does. One of the most insane and beautiful supers that you can get out there are any of the BEL complexes, and that would be things like Super Lesser and Super Bamboo and Super Mystic, or wait, not Super Mystic. A Super Mystic, for some reason, isn't an all-white snake with blue eyes. It's a completely different thing, as is many of the allelic combos in this family. BEL combos are absolutely beautiful. An all-white snake with blue eyes, they have a lot of people seeking this type of an animal. While that kind of ends the project, there's nothing else you can really add to it. However, there's a lot of the BEL complex that just don't follow those particular rules, like a Mystic Potion, which ends up creating a more purpley type snake with pattern. They're both blue-eyed leucistic genes, and they create this allelic combo. Not a super in this form, but they still act the same in that one copy will always pass along either Mystic or Mojave to its offspring. Crystal is a combination again of Mojave and Special, and this creates a different looking animal. You might think I was about to say purple again, but no, this one is a lot lighter and has more tinges of yellow and even some oranginess that come through. I actually have seen a lot of crystals being created in the Monsoon project, attempting to get some nice color into them. And even the Super Special itself is a snake that isn't all white. So there are a lot of allelic and super combos that exist within the BEL complex that are just absolutely incredible. The BEL complex is one that I love working. I think that it is a staple of the ball python community, and they're always very well sought after and beautiful animals. Next up would be the Yellowbelly Complex morphs, or sometimes what I hear called the Super Stripe Complex as well. These would be genes like Yellowbelly, which obviously is very, very famous, Asphalt, Gravel, Spark, and so on. These end up creating so many awesome combos, whether they're with themselves or allelic combos within the genetic family. Starting off with arguably one of the most popular, if not the most popular of these combos, would be the Freeways. They have an incredible amount of color, contrast, whether it be their kind of dirtier sides and then cleaning up near the top top. They have an orange Miami sunset type feel to them underneath the undertones. And then down the back of it famously runs its freeway. Lines that kind of dot the dorsal of the snake that resemble a road, which is where you get a lot of these genes being named after gravel or asphalt or something along those lines. There are a lot of cool combos within this family as well, just adding to it. Whether you're talking about leopard, which is just insane and cool. There's so much color, pattern that just blows up what you were once looking at and creates these beautiful webs throughout the animal. Or the very famous Mardi Gras, which is adding Anchi to that list and just brings in this nice, beautiful tinge to it. Pastels are also incredible in this combo, especially as babies, because you eliminate a lot of that color, but not the pattern. You bring in a lot of just whites and very light yellows to it, but you leave these crazy electric patterns going down the back of it, and they're just bold. Now, as they age, they do kind of re-add that yellow back into it, but they still age very beautifully, just in a different way. Freeway is, of course, an Allelic combo, but let's kind of switch gears into a couple supers. So let's talk about the asphalt. Super asphalts are incredibly beautiful animals that are bursting with so much color and pattern. The belly starts off kind of the same as the freeways do, in that they're kind of dirty, but some orangey type tints, but when it gets to the back, it's completely different. Gone are the freeway type looks and more of a twisted type dorsal pattern, almost these little hourglasses that go along the entire back of the snake, and this very darkish, maybe with a little bit of undertones of orange. But when you get these with other things too, like Enchi, it creates even more beautiful examples. So that's the super asphalt. So you might be looking at what the other gene creates in a super Yellowbelly. It must be just as insane as this one, right? Well, in most cases, it's an all-white snake with black eyes. Sometimes you do get some yellow striping along the back, or some yellow popping up on its head or in various parts of the body. Sometimes you get a little bit of pattern bleed, but in general, a super Yellowbelly is mostly all white. So it's incredible how these genes just work together, even though they look so similar to one another. They interact with each other so differently. And there are a lot of different morphs and combinations of allelic combinations in this incredibly diverse group of families, like super spar, the highways as well, which look incredibly similar to the freeways. But this is another one like the BELs that are just iconic, that will always have a bunch of interest in it from either someone who just wants a pet or someone who wants to breed these animals as well. Another one that we might think is like the BELs would be the black-eyed Leucistics, which are mostly what is known as the super fires or super sulfurs, but they're not always all white themselves. Often they have yellows or oranges that kind of just pop up on them. A super fire is almost exclusively an all-white snake with black eyes. Ironically, you can almost tell them, in this combo here, that it's a banana because of the red eyes underneath. But in general, you get a snake that's all white, that just has black eyes. But sometimes you get a super fire that has yellow down the back or spots of yellow along it. And then sulfur is another one that's thought to be very similar to fire. Well, that's one that almost always has pattern down the back of it. In fact, the super sulfurs are incredible. A perfect little dorsal that goes down the back like on this animal here and then just stops short of the head. This is incredible. I often wonder why sulfur is not worked a whole ton more when I see things like this. A quick little category here, but something that I had to talk about because they are similar to the BELs in that realistically they should be creating all white snakes, but these supers here are very different from each other. The black-eyed Leucistics seem to just create snakes that aren't all white, just mostly white. On to our first recessive allelic. Yes, even recessives can have allelics in there. Similar to how binos and candies can create the candino, clown and cryptic can create what we call a Crypton. This is an allelic recessive combo that essentially acts the same way. Whenever you breed it, you will create a either het clown or het cryptic. But a cryptic has a crazy wonky pattern, almost seems like it's a normal, and they look incredible in combos like you see here, almost at the peak of it. There's a lot going on here, obviously, in this one here, but you can kind of see that you get some of the absolute craziness that you would get out of a clown with the head, especially in certain combos. So anytime you see something that says het cryptic, het clown, that is what we call a Crypton. These are incredible animals because, especially with the popularity of clown, it kind of gives a little bit more of a flavor to it so that you can move in many different directions with it. Whenever you're talking about allelic, especially in a recessive project, something as popular as clown, it's something that you can get into your collection without having a copy of the other gender. You could get a cryptic, for example, a visual cryptic, either male or female, and breed it to the opposite gender. Then you would be able to create these pretty much immediately. Ideally, if you wanted to do it quickly, you could get a visual male and start creating some of these combos immediately to add some variety to what you are creating as well. The next allelic combo I wanted to talk about is something that's fascinating, and that would be the combination of the blackhead spider. Now, I'm including this not because it's a visually extraordinary animal. I'm including it because of what it is doing to the animal that is extraordinary. A spider is a very visual looking animal. A spider has these crazy spider webs on it. It's incredibly powerful what it does. It was so popular for so long, and then people noticed it has a wobble to it. And a lot of times people thought that this was because of a neurological issue. It has actually been discovered that this has nothing to do with their brains at all. It is actually an inner ear deficiency. So they have a balance problem. Whether that makes it worse or better or however you want to feel about it, that is for you to decide. Blackhead is another very visual looking animal. It is an incredibly dark animal. I actually love this genetic so darn much because even though it is so dark, it works so well with light genes and it's so perfect. I can't say enough good about the blackhead gene, but both of these genes are very obviously visual. They are also both in the spider complex gene, and the spider complex gene in itself is actually an extraordinary thing because there's so many things in there that can work well together, and there's other things that will literally kill every baby that hit that combo. So it's something that when you work, you should definitely pay attention to. Rest assured that blackhead has no issues whatsoever. In fact, as we're about to find out, the blackhead spider looks like a normal for the most part. They are a little bit different, a little bit wonky, but for the most part, they look like a normal. In fact, when they were first made, a lot of people thought that they missed, but they didn't. Genetically, we can prove that now. So what does that mean for the spider? Well, the wobble goes away completely. It cured the inner ear deficiency. It eliminates two of the most extreme phenotypes and washes both of them clean. One thing I've noticed on a lot of these, and maybe it's a coincidence, is that they seem to have this little lightning of color right in the middle of their head. This one has it right there. You can kind of see it, this line kind of like a lighter coloring on there. I don't know if maybe I'm just mistaking something and this isn't a lot of normals or something like that, but it's something I see in quite a few of them. You see it here too. As they get bigger, it kind of starts to go away, but it's still there. Absolutely fascinating, and while not something that is visually insane, it could be something that down the road could end up being significant. Moving right along to the super black pastel and super cinnamons, and these are incredibly beautiful animals because they create a very, very dark snake. There's no really contrast to be had here, very similar to how the BELs are, because they are an all white snake and that's beautiful, and this ends up being an all black snake, almost jet black, and it is incredibly, incredibly beautiful. And they're very, very unique in several different regards. For one, it is the darkest snake that you can effectively get for just a pure color, just creating an almost all jet black snake. In some cases, I have seen other examples that differ in terms of the tone of the black, but in general I've seen ones that are just jet black. Same thing with the cinnamon, although I think that they are not quite as dark. They are very, very dark, and they work very well with other genetics as well. However, there is one thing about these supers that is of somewhat of a note. When put together, it is found that they can unfortunately increase the odds of getting a kinked snake. And what a kink is a deviation usually in the spine of the animal that can cause death, which is very sad and unfortunate. Kinking in snakes is going to happen. And I don't think that creating super black pastels or super cinnamons creates such an increased odds that it is more than 50% or anything like that. I've never seen that or heard that, but it does increase the odds, not to the point where it is more than likely, but it is more likely than normal, if that makes any sense. So while I personally don't think that it makes it to the point where people probably shouldn't breed it, it is something that people need to consider. When you are breeding them, it is always a little bit of a higher chance. However, breeding in general, you're going to get that, unfortunately. Now, the most common super black pastel combo that's super popular is the panda pied, and that is a combination of super black pastel and pied. And what you end up getting is a very jet black snake, where it is black anyways, and just pure white everywhere else. And you get a lot of the white. I don't know why a snake known as black pastel ends up ceding so much territory to the white in the pied, but almost every panda pied is very, very low pattern or low black. And this goes with black pastel in general. They are very high white. They end up bringing in a bunch of these white type patterns. In fact, I have seen a fair amount of panda pieds that are all white, including the head, and that is no good, but they are very incredible. However, there is always that looming thought process behind that. You finally hit yourself a panda pied, and what if the worst happened, right? So it does make them a little bit less worked, but you can't deny the beauty in what you see. They are very, very beautiful and a very incredible, unique, and iconic super. Next up would be the super lace, or what it's more commonly known as, the white lace. And lace is an incredible gene. It's very subtle by itself, but in combos, it really suits the animal and enhances coloring rather than just completely lightening them up. The white lace does this even more incredibly. Almost similar to a different flavor of Desert Ghost or something like that. It really serves to clean up and brighten animals and enhance their looks quite a bit. But again, just like I mentioned in combos, they are absolutely stunning. There are a lot of really nice white lace combos, most of them with clowns. So we're going to start off with actually a sunset, which really serves to lighten the animal up and age it quite well. Sunset is known to by itself brown out as it ages. That won't be a problem with a white lace version of it. It will stay very similar to this and actually probably deepen its coloring in a way that doesn't brown out, and it actually enhances and enriches it. Obviously the clowns are a staple of it. You get this really nice creamy coloring, almost like a Desert Ghost in a way, but it doesn't serve to clean the animal's pattern like a Desert Ghost does. It almost lightens it up, similar to like a mixture of Hypo and Desert Ghost, which are already somewhat similar in themselves. But there are certain combos out there, like this spot-nosed Yellowbelly white lace clown, that just really show you some of the incredible potential of it. As they age, some of these animals change. With white lace, that really doesn't become too much of a problem. So you start to see in some of these other combos what I'm talking about, especially when you pair it with Desert Ghost. It creates an absolutely clean and bright animal, some of the most bright animals I've ever seen. But I would say it doesn't completely eliminate the dirtiness that you sometimes get out of this, which is sometimes very nice. Pompeii, for example, if you completely eliminate some of that dirty speckling and such like that, it wouldn't have the same flair. So it's similar to something like this with this spot-nosed Yellowbelly white lace clown. And in fact, I believe that this is part of the ingredients that they're attempting to do to create a Pompeii lace or a Pompeii white lace. It's kind of the first building blocks to go into something like that, which is going to look absolutely incredible because it's going to hold a lot of these. I remember looking at the special Pompeii and thinking that that was the best Pompeii version I've ever seen in my life, but the white lace version of this might end up taking the cake whenever it's eventually hit. Lace is definitely a gene that by itself is very subtle, but in its super form especially, it's very highly sought after and very beautiful. And last but not least would be the Super Scaleless, which might be the most insane look of a ball python ever, because quite frankly, it doesn't look like a ball python anymore. Almost looks like a hybrid of some sort, but it isn't. It is still a ball python, even though the care, which we'll get into, is a little different than a ball python, which is why from the get-go, I would like to mention that most people should not get one because the care is a little bit more. But the Scaleless head is a super form of both the Scaleless head or the Micro Scaleless that when combined create an all scaleless snake. What this does is obviously not just create this animal which looks and honestly feels just incredibly different. It changes the pattern. Typically with a scaleless head, they have one scale or a couple scales on their head somewhere missing, and that's it. When you get the super form of it, however, all the scales, they're gone. And the pattern is much different. It almost looks like it has a copy of Enchi in it in terms of its banding and such like that, only it's even more busy. It reduces the pattern, but then kind of condenses it as well, almost like it's adding a little bit more. It's almost like an upside down type world where every single version of a morph now will look different, not just in the fact that the scales are gone, but the pattern is going to be completely off the wall. If you ever get a chance to hold a scaleless head, I highly recommend you do so. They are very different, and you think that holding a snake is kind of an exotic type thing, holding a scaleless snake is even more insane. You can see even things like a Mojave. It almost looks like a noir thing. It looks like a black and white picture, but it is not. And notice that their eyes are a little bigger. I think this might just be because of the lack of scales. I could be wrong there. The pinstripes look incredibly exotic. Again, you start to look at their face though and everything like that, they look different. They don't look like a ball python. Even the pieds look very different. I mean, you can kind of get a close-up of this guy's face here. One of the biggest things that you see here is that their heat pits, they're completely gone. So again, it's another thing to consider there. It's a bit different in how they are. It's almost alien in many different ways, which makes them cool and super unique. For a long time, they had a very high price because they were difficult to work, but the care routine for these is different. You do need to have a higher humidity to help them with sheds, and on top of that, you don't want to usually keep them on cocoa husk from what I've heard because they have no scales. So rough surfaces like cocoa husk and especially things like cypress mulch could end up harming them. It's probably best to keep them on paper towel, which you will have to struggle with consistently to keep moist, or even better yet, a fine soil-like cocoa mulch. This means that your animal will probably be dirty a lot, but that's their best bet in my opinion, is to keep them on something like that and keep it very moist, but not swampy. They just have a completely different care regimen. I've heard of people say that they need to use lotion, and that's weird, and you'd have to be very, very careful because there's things in lotion that probably shouldn't be put on reptiles. Again, that's just some stuff I've heard. I don't keep the Scaleless, even though they are very cool. If there were no problems with it, I probably would keep them. And do I think that nobody should keep them? I don't think that. I don't think there's very much I think that nobody should keep. But do I think most people should think twice or thrice before jumping into something like this? Because I wouldn't. And I know many people who are much bigger than me who wouldn't either. You should do a lot of research, and you should question if you're the right person for an animal like this. And you should also understand that because of the issues, they're kind of caught in a weird limbo. They're hard to make, they're rare to find, and you'd think that that would drive up the price, but because there's not a lot of people looking for them because of the issues, it makes it even harder, so they don't get a whole bunch anymore. Quite frankly, you get a normal Scaleless for 700 here and probably get it for less, quite frankly. But again, the females are probably not the way to go. It'd probably be best to go with a visual male to a Scaleless head if you wanted to create something like that, and work females as not supers, basically. And those end up being sold as pet only. And the reason for that isn't because they'll die doing something like that, but the fact that they do have some fertility issues in the females. They're just not going to breed as well for you. Hope you enjoyed the video. There's a lot more supers and allelic combos out there that are absolutely incredible, and maybe we'll make a part 2 sometime. If you enjoyed this video, you can actually check out many of the other genetic videos that we have covered right here and here.